What's going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and welcome to another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where you can get maximum truth and minimum bullshit regarding the latest retail releases, based off of my honest thoughts, because I did a full playthrough of the game here on DSPGaming. The game we're going to talk about today is a classic case of, I think, a game developer overthinking what they want to do with a series or a certain subject matter. And this is a game that actually, for me, I highly anticipated. I think a lot of people highly anticipated this game because it was a direct sequel to a game that 2 years ago basically kind of revived a series of video games that previously hadn't been very good because they were all really crappy movie tie-ins. What I'm talking about today is Transformers Fall of Cybertron, okay? Transformers Fall of Cybertron is the direct sequel to 2010's War for Cybertron. It's made by the same game studio, High Noon Studios. And there's a little bit of backstory to this game before we get into the review, so let me explain. Back in 2010, High Noon came out with War for Cybertron. Critically acclaimed, okay? Because it actually featured all of the Generation 1 Transformers on Cybertron, and basically was a prequel to the actual Transformer story of when they traveled to Earth. Okay, before Cybertron basically was being destroyed and they were forced to leave and find another home, this was the story of everything that happened prior to that. How did Optimus Prime and Megatron come to power? Why were they fighting? The game featured several large-scale battles with humongous Transformers, amazing graphic design. The art design of the game was just outstanding, but in addition to all of that, it had some of the voice actors from the actual TV series, and in addition to that, it actually had really good gameplay. Standard third-person shooter fare, but you had a primary weapon, a secondary weapon. You were able to transform on the fly into a vehicle. Vehicles also had different mechanics. Some stages you could be a flying jet, some stages you could be a car. It all depended on who you were playing during that series of the game. That portion of the game is what I meant to say. It featured two separate campaigns, one of the Autobots and one of the Decepticons, and people loved the fact that you could play as both, and that basically, you could see both sides of the action. And then one of the major things that really made the game A+ in my opinion, co-op. The game had full campaign co-op for 3 players. And I actually did a campaign co-op of the Autobot side campaign with John Rambo and Howard back in 2010. We had an absolute blast playing the game, okay? In addition to that, it had some pretty robust multiplayer modes with Capture the Flag, with Team Deathmatch, etc., etc., etc. So, why am I talking so much about the game that's basically the first installment of the series and not Fall of Cybertron? Well, I wanted to basically explain to you all the great things about that game and the things that were changed for Fall of Cybertron that I really feel made the game a lot worse, okay? So, first of all, no co-op. And I am annoyed about that because, like I said, it was a blast playing with John and Howard. I actually wish that I had done both the Autobot and Decepticon campaigns completely co-op with those guys. It was awesome to have the interaction. We were always running around helping each other during the fights. We're looking for hidden items, and just being able to do that with your buddies is a real added plus. In Fall of Cybertron, they decided to remove the co-op. Now, they were interviewed about it, and they asked High Noon Studios, why did you remove the co-op from the game? High Noon Studios' response was, well, in this game, what we'd like to do is really focus more on the individual Transformers and their abilities. We want, when you're playing as these guys, we want you to feel like each time you play with a different character that it's a unique experience, and we didn't feel that you got that in War for Cybertron because since it was co-op, we wanted to make the guys more generic, and so, most of the guys had a light weapon, a heavy weapon, and it really wasn't that much variety between the characters. Here we really want a lot of drastically different changes so that it really represents who those characters are from the series. Okay, that's a fair enough answer. But did it translate to that while playing this game? Well, let me put it to you this way. Fall of Cybertron no longer has 2 separate campaigns. It has one campaign where you actually go back and forth between the Autobots and the Decepticons while Cybertron is basically falling apart, and you're desperate to find a way to survive and or get everyone off of Cybertron in one piece. Some levels, such as there are 2 entire chapters, the game has 13 chapters, by the way. 2 entire chapters are dedicated to Optimus Prime, which is pretty much some of the introductory levels of the game, but they're also some of the longest, and it is very generic. It's just using your guns. He really doesn't have any unique abilities or anything like that that makes him any different from anybody else. Then you proceed to have 2 stages that star Cliffhanger and Jazz respectively. In the first stage you play as Cliffhanger, and the second stage you play as Jazz. Cliffhanger stage all of a sudden turns into almost like a Metal Gear Solid type of deal where he has a cloaking device that he's supposed to use to sneak by certain enemies, but the game doesn't always do a great job of explaining the objectives and giving you good waypoints, so sometimes you just don't know where to go and you end up wandering into an area where the enemies see you and you don't know what you're supposed to be rushing towards and you just get blown apart. In the Jazz missions, the only unique thing about Jazz is that he has a hook shot, or whatever you want to call it, a whip or whatever, that he can shoot and he can pull himself to ledges. It's really not that revolutionary. There's nothing really big there. So in the first 5 chapters, really there's not that much that's really reflective of these characters. You've got a generic Optimus Prime, a Cliffhanger that can turn invisible but the gameplay actually kind of falters, and Jazz who can latch onto ledges. So just in the first half of the game, you're like, what were they talking about when they said it was going to be really unique to the character? It doesn't seem like that. Then you start to play as the Decepticons. And you have a couple different things that happen. You start off as one of the Decepticons that's actually a chopper and or jet. This stage is actually pretty fun. You spend some of it flying, you spend some of it on the ground using your unique combat abilities. Then after that, you have to actually fly around and destroy a bridge. Pretty unique and pretty fun. Then you become a guy that's basically a car, a heavy car, or tank. His name is Onslaught, I believe. And the mission is to disable this Autobot transport ship that's carrying Energon. The mission is like 4 minutes long. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not like trying to downplay it. The mission is 4 minutes long. You just blow up the treads, and next thing you know, the mission's over. And you're like, wow, really? It's over already? There are several missions in the game that are like that. Several chapters in the game. There's a chapter where you play as Soundwave, and all you do is rebuild Megatron. Then you don't get to play as Soundwave. You actually go over to Megatron. Megatron really isn't that unique either. He has a heavy weapon, a light weapon, and he has the ability to hover. So wow, he can hover. Big deal. Never did I really feel that anything was really unique about the characters I was playing in this game. There is one exception. In the final chapter of the game does give you the opportunity to play as Soundwave, and you can actually eject your cassette tapes, which are Laserbeak and Rumble, and they are your minions who actually go off and fight in the combat. This is a really fun scene in the game. It's actually really exciting and it's cool to have this game mechanic. Problem being, it only lasts for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, it switches out from Soundwave and goes to a different character, and you're left saying, what the hell? I'd say probably the most unique stage of the game you actually play is Grimlock, and the unique thing about him is he's humongous, and he can pretty much destroy enemies really quickly. And he also has the ability, when he builds up a rage, which means basically he just gets hit, he transforms into his Tyrannosaurus Rex robot cell, and that is kind of neat. Another neat stage is when all the Combaticons actually combine to form Bruticus, who's a gigantic Decepticon, and he's just smashing through walls and blowing shit up. But again, it's so short-lived for what it is. The really epic parts of this game that I feel that they copped out from doing co-op are the parts where you're Grimlock, where you're Bruticus, and those parts of the game are too short-lived or not really implemented that well. The Grimlock stage is okay, but by the end of it, you kind of start to get bored of it. I just don't think that the choice to leave co-op out of this game was a good one. I actually think the game falters and suffers because it's not co-op. And the campaign itself is only about 6.5 hours long. Now let's talk about the multiplayer, okay? The multiplayer of the game has standard modes, just pretty much very similarly to last year's release from High Noon, Dark of the Moon, which actually was a movie tie-in game that was kind of rushed, and that's why it really wasn't that good. But also, it has an escalation mode, which is basically just horde mode or survival mode, whatever you want to call it, in these shooter games where you get waves of enemies that come after you, and you have to survive 15 waves, and then you get a trophy and or achievement. That part actually is co-op. You can do it with up to 3 other people online, and that's kind of neat. But really, it's not very inspired. The game modes are pretty much the same as they were. The multiplayer, it pretty much feels like you're playing either War for Cybertron or Dark of the Moon's multiplayer. It doesn't feel any different. So really, they didn't add much to the multiplayer of the game at all. So, for what people waiting 2 years for this game to come out, what it ended up being was basically High Noon Studios thinking that the game needed to go in one direction creatively, but I really don't feel that they did a good job. I think that the parts of the game where you get to beat giant robots either are too short in the case of Bruticus, or they really didn't utilize it well like they did with Grimlock. The parts of the game that you wish that were really fun, you wish you could do more, like play a Soundwave, you only do for 5 minutes. And everything else just ends up being very generic. Like I said, the stages with Optimus Prime, with Jazz, with Cliff Jumper, either it's very generic gameplay, or they just falter. Like that whole Metal Gear gameplay really doesn't work out too well because it's confusing, and you're going to end up dying multiple times. So, really, Fall of Cybertron, in my opinion, kind of was a step in the wrong direction. They thought that artistically and creatively they wanted to go this way, but it didn't work. I think that if this game was very similar to War for Cybertron, where you had full 3-player co-op, you had the separate campaigns so you can choose who you want to play as and such, I think the game actually would have been a lot better. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad game. The game shines in many different ways. Number one, once again, the graphics are outstanding. Everything in this game, going through the worlds of Cybertron and experiencing all the cool design of everything in this techno kind of deal is awesome. Okay, it looks really amazing, really breathtaking to be on Cybertron again. The voice acting, outstanding. You can tell these guys are pros. The dialogue in the game, a lot of it is actually directly lifted from the 1980, and I think it was 86, Transformers animated movie. That's right, a lot of the lines in here, like when Rumble jumps out, he says, first we break the shell, first we crack the shell, then we crack the nuts inside. Direct quote from the movie. You've got a lot of lines that, if you're listening, Sludge, he's the Triceratops, knocks a door over on top of an Insecticon, and as he's walking over, says, "Excuse me." That's exactly what he says in the movie when he does exactly the same thing. So really what this game is fan service for longtime fans of Transformers. If you were a fan of the Transformers in the 80s and 90s, this game is a must-get, okay? But if you're not a fan of Transformers, there's really not a lot unique about this game. A lot of the gameplay is going to be generic. You're going to have frustrating parts. You're going to have parts that shine. You're like, wow, this is great. And then they're going to end and you're like, what the fuck? That was so fast. Why did they do that? It's kind of like, here you go. You want the chocolate? You want the chocolate? Well, you have one nibble. Fuck you. Take the chocolate back now. And it just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth like, God, I have blue balls. I want to go back and play as fucking Soundwave in more than one room of the game, and you never get that opportunity. It's really annoying. So in that case, I think they fail. So if you're a fan of Transformers, a longtime fan of Transformers like I am, you're going to enjoy the game a lot. Okay? It's not a bad game. It's just not as good as the previous one. And that's a shame, because when you have a previous installment that was better than the one that you worked 2 years on, you had time to develop, that shows that something went wrong. And I really think the creative direction of the game took a wrong turn. If they had kept the co-op in, if they had done a lot of the similar things they did in the first game, this game would have been a lot better. I think actually it suffers because of the creative direction that it took. So that being said, how do I rate Transformers Fall of Cybertron? Well, I'm going to do what I actually did for a couple games last year, where I said if you're a fan of the series, you're going to think it's one thing. If you're not a fan, you're going to think it's another thing, okay? If you are a longtime fan of Transformers like I am, you're probably going to enjoy the hell out of the game, regardless of the fact that the campaign is kind of quick and the multiplayer is kind of repetitive. You're probably still going to enjoy playing the game, and I did. Even though some of it was frustrating and I did get let down a lot, I still enjoyed the game. The quotes, the fan service, the fans having those quotes from the movies, the design of the characters, the fact that the art style of the game is amazing, the fact that some of the original voices of the Transformers are in the game, all those things add to the fan service factor of this game. So if you're a diehard fan of Transformers, you're probably going to give this game, I'd say, maybe a 7.75, okay? It's not quite a great game, but it is a good game. And it does a lot of things right, especially for the fans who are noticing all these little things. The ultimate fan service in this game, in the credits of the game, they sing "You've Got the Touch." This is the theme song pretty much the iconic 1980s, you know, hair rock song by Stan Bush that became iconic with the animated movie in the 1980s. You Got the Touch, okay? Well, they put it in the credits of the game. And so finally, like, wow, finally. They won't do it with the live-action movies for whatever reason, but they finally put it in the credits of one of the games. You really know that they're trying to reach this hardcore audience from the 1980s. That's what they're trying to appeal to with this game. So, if you are a hardcore fan, 7.75. If you're not a hardcore Transformers fan, you're going to miss out on a lot of the stuff that kind of make this game a little bit more epic. And just because of that, you might think it's more of a generic third-person shooter than anything else. Of course, there will be a couple unique things like this. Like I said, the stage when you're flying as a jet, the stage where you're Bruticus and you get to do stuff in the Grimlock stage, and here and there you'll have a little bit of uniqueness with Soundwave or whatever. But outside of those few minutes of greatness, you're going to think the game's kind of generic. The online play, to be completely honest, once you've played through maybe a couple hours of the online play, it all just boils down to being repetitive. And there's really no reason to go back. I don't foresee this being a game that after maybe a month that people are going to continue to play the online play for. I'm sorry to say that. You know, there are games that kind of stand the test of time. This one is too similar to the past two games made by these guys. They didn't really put many improvements into the online play, if any, and I really think that it becomes repetitive quickly. So, for a non-Transformers fan, Transformers Fall of Cybertron with only a 7-hour campaign and multiplayer that becomes repetitive and you're probably not going to play after a couple hours is going to be a 6.5. And it is still above average, but it's not that much above average. The only reason it really gets a 6.5 is because it does have the amount of content that it has with the online play and such. This game is a disappointment for me. I was really looking for something better. I was looking for a game that they actively looked at War for Cybertron and said, how can we improve this in ways that are going to make it a more quality for gameplay-wise, and instead what it looks like they did, they focused on fan service more than anything else, which is nice for me being a Transformers fan, but it's not great for anyone who's not. Looking at it objectively, as a game, in comparison to everything out there, the fact that it's kind of repetitive, kind of annoying in parts, the online play is repetitive, the game is really only a 6.5. Kind of a disappointment. I really wish that they had done a better job. I don't know if they're going to make another one after this one, because I'd be interested to see how the sales do once people start seeing that the game really isn't as good as the first one. And I don't know. I have hope that hopefully they'll come back and do another co-op game of Transformers, but at this point I realistically don't know if they ever will, especially because now the end of this game, they actually end up going to Earth, and now you're like, well, that's kind of the canon mainstream storyline, and they're off Cybertron. What are they going to do now with a game like this? And I don't know if they ever will make another one. So that's it. If you're a fanboy of Transformers, 7.75. If you're not, 6.5. Okay? So that's my feelings, and that's my honest opinion on Transformers Fall of Cybertron. I hope that now you have a little bit better picture about the game, and you know whether or not you're interested in getting it. Again, I try to cut through all the bullshit and be completely honest with everyone. I don't think this game was as good as it could have been because of the design changes that they made from the first game. And that's it. I'm always going to speak the truth. I'm not going to, even though I'm a fanboy and I could have said, oh, there's all this fan service, I really don't think it was enough to be called this a great game and to be a must-buy. So, that's it for the Hateful Truth this time around. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Peace.